In the icy mountains of the Himalayas, where the air is so thin that each breath is a conscious effort, lived one of the most extraordinary spiritual masters in history, Milarepa, the cotton-clad yogi. Milarepa had spent years in solitary retreat, practicing advanced tantric techniques that few dared to attempt. One of these practices was known as Bardo Yoga, the art of consciously navigating the intermediate states between life and death. On a particularly cold winter night, as the wind through the rocky peaks like the voices of ancestral spirits, Milarepa decided to embark on what would be his deepest experience of Bardo Yoga yet. Seated in lotus position in his austere cave, wearing only a white cotton robe that gave him his name, Milarepa began the practice he had perfected over decades, conscious death.
Today,
He said to his disciple Rinpoche, who had come to visit him,
I will show you that death is not the end of consciousness, but merely a transition into another state of being.
Rinpoche, a young monk with bright eyes and a restless mind, watched with a mix of fascination and apprehension.
Master,
He asked,
how is it possible to die consciously and return to tell the experience?
Milarepa smiled, his eyes radiating a serenity born of years of intense spiritual practice.
Most people experience death unconsciously. They are swept away by the winds of karma without understanding what's happening. But one who has trained the mind can consciously navigate the bardos.
Bardos?
Asked Rinpoche.
The intermediate states.
Explained Milarepa.
There is the bardo of life, the bardo of dying, the bardo of dharmata, pure reality, and the bardo of becoming, where consciousness seeks a new birth. Today, I will pass through all of them while remaining fully aware.
Milarepa closed his eyes and began to regulate his breathing in a very specific way. First, he gradually slowed his breath until it became nearly imperceptible. Then, using complex visualization techniques, he began to consciously withdraw his life energy from the various centers of his body. Rinpoche watched, both captivated and alarmed, as his master's body began to show signs of life retreating. Milarepa's body temperature began to drop. His pulse became nearly undetectable, and his breath slowed to almost nothing.
Master!
Cried Rinpoche, fearing something had gone wrong. But Milarepa, though his body appeared to be dying, maintained crystal-clear awareness of what was happening. He had entered the first bardo, the bardo of dying. In his consciousness, Milarepa experienced the gradual dissolution of the elements that make up the physical body. First, the earth element dissolved, and he felt his body become heavy and immobile. Then, the water element dissolved, and all sensations of fluidity vanished. The fire element followed, and his body heat dissipated. Finally, the air element dissolved, and breathing ceased completely. But Milarepa did not lose consciousness. Instead, he found himself in a state of clear light, the bardo of dharmata. In this state, Milarepa experienced reality in its purest form, free from the distortions of ordinary sensory perception. He saw that all existence was a dance of light and awareness, that all forms were temporary manifestations of a single fundamental energy.
Incredible.
Milarepa thought, maintaining clarity of awareness even in this extraordinary state.
Here is the true nature of mind, luminous, empty, and cognizant.
But the journey wasn't over. Gradually, Milarepa felt his consciousness being drawn into the third bardo, the bardo of becoming, where consciousness typically seeks a new rebirth. In this state, Milarepa saw visions of countless possible rebirths. He saw himself as a powerful king, as a wild animal, as a celestial being, as a hungry spirit. Each vision came with karmic impulses trying to pull him into a new existence. But Milarepa had trained for this moment. Rather than being dragged unconsciously by these impulses, he observed them with perfect equanimity, recognizing them as projections of his own mind.
All these visions are like reflections on water. They appear real, but are merely empty appearances.
It was then that Milarepa made a conscious decision to return to his physical body to share this experience with his disciple and the world. Slowly, he began to reverse the process. His consciousness reconnected with the physical body, the elements reintegrated, and gradually, life returned. Richungpa, who had spent hours watching what seemed like his master's lifeless body, nearly fainted with relief when Milarepa's eyes opened.
Master, I thought you had truly died.
I did. And I returned. Death is not what people think it is.
What do you mean?
Asked Richungpa, still trembling from the experience.
Death is simply consciousness separating from the physical body. But consciousness itself is indestructible. Those who die unconsciously are swept by the winds of karma like leaves in a storm. But those who have trained the mind can navigate consciously through the bardos.
Milarepa then described in detail his journey through the 3 bardos, explaining each phase and the visions he had encountered.
The most important thing is to understand that all visions in the bardos, whether terrifying or beautiful, are projections of the mind itself. If you recognize this, you free yourself from the cycle of birth and death.
But Master, how can we be sure this wasn't just a dream or hallucination?
Because I brought back knowledge I did not possess before. During my journey in the bardo, I met other conscious beings who taught me practices I had never learned in this life.
To prove his point, Milarepa demonstrated a complex meditation technique that Richungpa had never seen before, explaining that he had learned it from a master he encountered in the bardo of Dharmata.
Furthermore, my body has undergone real physical changes. Look at my hands.
Richungpa looked and was astonished. Milarepa's hands, which before the experience had shown signs of age and wear, now looked rejuvenated with a subtle luminosity that hadn't been there before.
The conscious journey through the bardos not only expands awareness, but can even regenerate the physical body. This happens because you directly access the source of all vital energy.
Imagine mastering death as a conscious act, not an abrupt end, but a carefully guided transformation. To most of us, death arrives unbidden, a moment that feels uncontrollable and final. But Milarepa, the revered Tibetan yogi, claimed there was an entirely different way. He taught that with the right training, the moment of death could become a powerful opportunity to unravel the mysteries of existence itself. This was not just a philosophy for Milarepa, it was a lived experience, and what he described, from precise stages of disintegration to visions of radiant light, offers one of the most fascinating and detailed explorations of death ever recorded. Not everyone, however, accepts these claims at face value. Skeptics argue that Milarepa's ability to navigate these states consciously might be an exaggeration or symbolic rather than literal. To some, the bardos could be seen as metaphors for what happens internally during moments of transformation, when an old identity dies and a new perspective emerges. But even among skeptics, there's an undeniable intrigue. If these accounts are myths, why do they align so closely with experiences reported in near-death studies thousands of years later? Milarepa's descriptions of the bardos begin with the dissolution of physical elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space that make up the human body. Each element, he claimed, unravels in its own way as life comes to an end. First, the sensation of solidity fades. The body feels heavy and immovable, signaling the dissolution of the earth element. Then, the water element ebbs, manifesting as an overwhelming dryness. Next, the internal heat associated with fire wanes, followed by the collapse of breath as air dissolves. Finally, the sense of spaciousness encloses the mind. Milarepa explained that at this point, most people black out. But for a trained yogi, this is where the real journey begins. What happens next is often described in terms of light, unimaginable, all-encompassing light. When the final element dissolves, awareness may enter the bardo of Dharmata, or pure reality. Here, according to Milarepa, everything experienced in life appears as it truly is, interconnected, ephemeral, yet breathtaking in its luminous clarity. Tibetan texts describe this state as encountering the clear light of reality, something that can lead to liberation if recognized. But for most, this experience is fleeting, and fear or confusion tends to pull the mind further down into a cycle of rebirth. This description might sound otherworldly, and yet it shares striking similarities with accounts of near-death experiences. Many people who have been brought back from the brink of death report floating out of their bodies, watching their final moments unfold as though from above. Others describe passing through a tunnel toward an incredibly bright, comforting light. There are even cases where individuals recall life reviews, moments when their entire existence flashes before them in extraordinary detail. The parallels with Milarepa's teachings are difficult to ignore. Both lay out a journey where consciousness separates from the body and encounters a profound, luminous reality. What makes this comparison even more striking is how these insights seem to capture the complexity of human awareness. Milarepa perceived the bardos as deeply personal yet universal, unique to each individual's karma, while steeped in a larger truth about the nature of existence. Similarly, those who've had near-death experiences often describe them as transformative, a moment when the ordinary rules of life no longer apply and a sense of unity begins to emerge. Of course, this raises an important question. Were Milarepa's teachings spiritual wisdom, an early form of scientific observation, or perhaps some combination of the two? His practices involved meditative techniques so sophisticated that they require years, sometimes a lifetime, to master. In many ways, these techniques resemble controlled experiments, disciplined methods designed to explore the boundaries of life and death. Some might even argue that Tibetan Buddhism has contributed to an early understanding of what we now consider states of heightened consciousness. Milarepa's journey offers a historical lens for understanding what might happen in the moments of death. His accounts don't merely entertain, they challenge us to consider the very nature of our existence, the possibility that awareness transcends the body. And while some may interpret his experiences symbolically, others see them as practical guidance for what lies ahead. Whatever the case, they leave us grappling with a question that remains tantalizingly relevant. Could modern near-death experiences, described with such uncanny familiarity, point to the same universal truths Milarepa explored and thoughtful? What might they reveal about the deepest mysteries of consciousness? Did you know that 51% of people who faced life-threatening situations report experiencing something extraordinary? This phenomenon, known as near-death experiences, or NDEs, has fascinated scientists, physicians, and philosophers alike. It's not just a rare occurrence either. A groundbreaking study conducted by the University of São Paulo looked at 350 Brazilians and found that 14% of the general population reported having had an NDE. But what's even more surprising is how that number jumps dramatically to over half when you focus on those who've been in critical or life-threatening situations. The study didn't just confirm how common these experiences are. It suggested they're worth paying serious attention to, especially if we want to understand human consciousness at its most vulnerable moments. Now you might wonder, what exactly happens during an NDE? Scientists have managed to identify patterns, common experiences that many people report, no matter where they are from or what their cultural background might be. One of the most striking is the sense of leaving the body. People describe floating, often looking down at themselves as though they're an observer. Imagine being in an operating room, watching doctors frantically working to save you, and realizing you're hovering near the ceiling, calmly observing the chaos below. It's a vivid and consistent detail in many reports. Other common features include the sensation of moving through a tunnel, often toward a bright, warm light. This light is frequently described as overwhelming, not just in brightness but in the sense of peace and unconditional love it radiates. Many individuals also report seeing their lives flash before their eyes, a panoramic life review where every moment, decision and relationship presents itself in stunning detail. And then there are the encounters with deceased loved ones or beings that people interpret as spiritual guides. These meetings often carry messages or a sense of profound connection, further heightening the emotional depth of the experience. But not every NDE looks the same. The study revealed that while many NDEs are serene and uplifting, some can be incredibly distressing. For instance, people have described being stuck in a void, feeling an unbearable sense of isolation, or even encountering threatening figures. Researchers at the University of São Paulo categorized these experiences into 3 types: peaceful, neutral, and disturbing. This diversity underscores just how personal these experiences can be and challenges the idea of NDEs as a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. It also raises questions about the factors influencing whether an NDE is comforting or upsetting. Are these rooted in brain activity, personal beliefs, or something else entirely? The scientific community remains divided on how to interpret these events. On one side, there are those who look for spiritual significance, believing NDEs could reveal truths about what happens after death. On the other, skeptics often question whether these experiences are little more than the brain's response to extreme stress. Some argue they could be hallucinations triggered by oxygen deprivation or chemical changes as the brain begins to shut down. Others believe the answer lies somewhere in between, with both neurological and metaphysical elements playing a role. However, dismissing NDEs as mere figments of the imagination can feel overly simplistic, given how vivid and life-changing these experiences often are. A man who faced cardiac arrest, for example, recounted feeling himself pulled through a tunnel where he met a familiar but deceased relative. The encounter filled him with peace, but when told it wasn't his time, he felt an overwhelming reluctance as he was sent back. When he awoke in the hospital moments later, the vividness of the experience haunted him, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made him reevaluate everything he thought he understood about life and death. Stories like this are hard to dismiss outright. That's where the University of São Paulo's research carries weight. By collecting data from such a large, diverse group, it brought objectivity to what has often been a highly subjective topic. People from different religious beliefs, backgrounds, and even those identifying as atheists reported experiencing similar phenomena. This consistency reinforces the idea that, while the interpretations may differ, the core experience of an NDE seems to transcend individual belief systems. That raises an important question. If people separated by geography and culture describe the same sensations, could it hint at something universal about human consciousness? Perhaps what's most compelling about NDEs is their transformative impact. Even in cases where the event was brief or only involved a portion of the common elements, like floating out of the body or seeing a tunnel, many people report coming back with a changed perspective. They often describe a newfound appreciation for life, less fear of death, and a deeper sense of connection to others. While skeptics might argue about where exactly these experiences come from, there's no denying their power to shift how someone thinks or lives afterward. So, how do these modern accounts compare to what Milarepa described centuries ago? After all, his entry into the bardos, a state of consciousness that mirrors many elements described in NDEs, also seemed to involve separation from the body, encounters with luminous light, and moments of deep introspection. Could these shared patterns mean that NDEs and Milarepa's ancient practices are connected in some way? If the elements remain consistent across time, cultures, and now scientific studies, what does that reveal about the nature of death, or, perhaps more intriguingly, the nature of consciousness itself? What if the mind's most extraordinary moments happen right at the brink of death? Thoughtful. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, push us to re-examine what we know about the boundaries of human consciousness. These experiences, marked by vivid sensations of light, profound peace, and even out-of-body travel, may feel surreal or mystical, but they've been the focus of serious scientific study. Researchers have spent decades trying to uncover what's happening in the mind during these moments. Is it just the brain's final tricks, or do these experiences hint at something more? Something the physical brain alone cannot explain. Scientists have proposed several theories that focus on the brain's activity in extreme situations. One prominent idea revolves around DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, a naturally occurring psychedelic compound found in human brains. DMT is known to create vivid, dreamlike experiences when artificially ingested. Some scientists believe that the brain may release a surge of DMT during moments of extreme stress, like during death or near-death scenarios. Imagine the visuals and sensations this might create: bright lights, feelings of transcendence, and an overwhelming sense of unity. These are all effects associated with NDEs and with DMT use. However, this theory doesn't account for one crucial detail: the deeply personal and transformative nature of NDEs. People who've experienced them return with profound changes in perspective, shifts in values, priorities, and even a rethinking of death itself. A chemical release doesn't fully explain why such fleeting moments often leave such permanent marks on those who experience them. Another theory suggests that NDEs result from bursts of neural activity in the brain during moments of crisis, such as cardiac arrest. Even when the heart stops, studies show that the brain can display residual electrical activity for a brief time. Researchers have observed sharp spikes during these moments, possibly linked to the vivid sensations people later recall. It's as if the brain, in its final moments, generates one last surge of interpretive power, creating highly detailed experiences. This might account for the panoramic life reviews, where individuals suddenly see their entire lives play out. These surges of activity raise fascinating questions about how the brain processes reality in critical situations. But similar to the DMT explanation, this theory doesn't clarify why the experiences feel so specific, or why they often include elements, such as conversations with deceased relatives, that seem far beyond what the brain could fabricate from memory alone. Psychological defense mechanisms provide yet another perspective. From this angle, NDEs are seen as the mind's attempt to protect itself in moments of intense trauma. Facing near certain death, the psyche may create a kind of escape route, a comforting or numbing fantasy that shields us from the pain or fear of dying. The bright tunnel of light, for example, might symbolize a deep-rooted human desire for continuity and comfort. From this perspective, the profound emotions and sensations felt during NDEs are simply coping mechanisms born out of the brain's need to preserve psychological stability in the face of overwhelming stress. And yet, this explanation raises its own questions. If these mechanisms are purely protective, Why do so many people emerge with a stronger sense of purpose, a deeper love for life, and a perspective that seems to transcend their personal trauma? Though each theory offers significant pieces to the puzzle, none of them quite explain all the nuances of NDEs. If DMT explains the visual imagery, why do these experiences also include such profound emotional and existential clarity? If neural activity accounts for the sensation of leaving the body, why do so many survivors describe seeing events from angles far removed from their physical position that can later be verified? If psychological defenses create these experiences to ease trauma, why do they include moments, like meetings with deceased loved ones, that carry specific and surprising messages? The patchwork of explanations reflects the complexity of human consciousness itself, a field so far from full understanding that every new discovery only opens more questions. What's more, NDEs bring us into an ongoing debate. Are these vivid experiences purely neurological, or do they point to something spiritual? For scientists, consciousness is typically framed as a product of the brain, an extraordinary result of neurons firing in coordinated patterns. This means that when the brain stops, consciousness should also cease. But NDEs complicate this assumption, as many involve startlingly clear perceptions that seem to occur when the brain is supposedly inactive. On the flip side, traditions like Tibetan Buddhism view consciousness not as a product of the physical body, but as something that exists independently of it. Milarepa's account of the bardos aligns with this view, suggesting that what modern science calls NDEs may be glimpses into these intermediate states of existence.
The interplay between these spiritual and scientific interpretations is where the mystery deepens. While science offers compelling insights into how the brain reacts in extreme circumstances, it struggles to explain the lasting transformation these moments create. NDE survivors often return with stories remarkably similar to what ancient traditions have described for centuries. And just like those ancient teachings, modern NDEs seem to suggest that consciousness is far more complex than we've been able to define. None of this is to say the existing scientific theories aren't valuable. They absolutely are. DMT, neural activity, and psychological defenses provide meaningful starting points for understanding how the mind processes the most extreme boundary of existence. But as the subjective stories pile up, their richness and consistency show us that a final, comprehensive explanation still eludes us. Could NDEs, as personal and profound as they are, truly represent a meeting place between biology and a deeper universal mystery? That, of course, leads to one final question. If science, personal testimony, and ancient wisdom were to converge, could we finally understand the true nature of consciousness? How does an experience that lasts only moments change a lifetime? That's the question many who have had near-death experiences, or NDEs, struggle to answer. For Andy Petro, his experience in 1955 didn't just stay with him, it reshaped the way he viewed his entire existence. It happened just before his high school graduation, during an ordinary day swimming in a cold lake. What began as a simple dive turned into something extraordinary. After plunging into the water, he reached depths where the temperature became unbearable, and his muscles cramped to the point he couldn't swim back up. As he sank deeper, feeling the weeds against his feet and the icy grip of water surrounding him, he was overtaken by a realization: he was dying. Instead of panic, what followed was an unexpected voice in his mind urging him to rest and let go. He resisted at first, struggling against the pull of the lake and the inevitability of his situation, but eventually he gave in. That moment of surrender flipped his reality. Andy described popping out of his body and finding himself in a strange but beautiful tunnel. There, the cold vanished, replaced by warmth and an overwhelming sense of joy. He saw his lifeless body sitting still at the bottom of the lake, but instead of horror or sadness, he felt nothing but peace. Peaceful. "I was home,"
he would later say, as though everything he was experiencing was where he truly belonged. Moving toward an intense, welcoming light, Andy entered what he called a sphere, an all-encompassing space where life itself seemed to unfold. Inside, scenes from his life played out on what felt like endless screens, but it wasn't just his current life. He saw flashes of lives as someone entirely different from who he thought he was, even moments as a female and experiences on other worlds. It didn't confuse him, it just made sense. As each moment unfolded, he felt the emotions it carried, not just his feelings, but the emotions of everyone involved in those events. This wasn't just a replay of his life, it was an immersive understanding of cause and effect, as though the light guiding him wanted him to see the interconnectedness of everything he had ever done. The light had a personality, not a figure, but a presence, filled with warmth and humor. It communicated directly with Andy, not through words, but through what he described as a complete understanding. It even teased him gently, pointing out moments in his life where he could have enjoyed himself more, where he could have let go of fear to embrace joy. The message was clear. Life on Earth was like a play. Everyone was wearing a costume, playing their scripted role. It wasn't real in the ultimate sense, but rather an opportunity to experience and grow. The light emphasized that love, choosing love over hate, was the key to everything. Andy came to understand that his purpose on Earth wasn't tied to achievements or status. It was simply to experience joy. But just as Andy adjusted to this profound sense of freedom, the light informed him that he couldn't stay. "You have to return," it said. Andy resisted, pleading to remain in this place of warmth and understanding. The thought of returning to his body felt like a punishment. He didn't want the cold, physical world back, not after experiencing the oneness of what he now considered home. Yet the light insisted, guiding him back toward his human life. Andy described the return as the most horrible feeling he had ever experienced. The cold hit him again, the wet darkness of the lake, the density of his physical body. It was all so stark compared to the bliss he'd just left behind. And yet, his transition back into living was seamless in one respect. Andy never lost his sense of continuity. He said, "It was a continuous flow of consciousness, from the moment he left his body to the moment he re-entered it." Though Andy would later surface from that lake and recover physically, the experience stayed with him. For almost 30 years, he shared it with no one, unsure of how to reconcile something so otherworldly. In 1975, when Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, introduced the concept of near-death experiences to a broader audience, Andy finally realized he wasn't alone. He wasn't crazy, as he'd once feared. This validation changed his life yet again. What followed was a deep rethinking of how he approached his existence. He no longer saw life on Earth as something to be taken too seriously. Instead, he lived with detachment, not in the sense of apathy, but with an understanding of its temporary nature. For him, Earth was a stage, and joy was the essence of what truly mattered. Today, Andy embraces simplicity and humor. "What I'm choosing to do is help people feel better about themselves," he says. His clarity, rooted in that singular event, has driven him to share what he calls the return ticket back home. A message of love, connection, and the reassurance that there's more waiting beyond what's visible. He views death not as an end, but as a reunion, a transition to something far more real than the life we perceive now. "I'm still really wondering and waiting to get back home," he says, holding on to the peace of knowing what's to come. Andy's story captures why near-death experiences transform lives. Whether viewed as spiritual or neurological, they shift perspectives profoundly, often in ways we can only compare to ancient wisdom, like Milarepa's journey through the bardos. Both suggest that consciousness reaches far beyond the physical, connecting everyone and everything in unimaginable ways. What remains is the question: could these experiences, modern and ancient alike, be glimpses into the true fabric of our reality? Could ancient spiritual practices hold clues to the mysteries of consciousness? Imagine for a moment that the accounts of a Tibetan yogi from the 11th century and modern near-death experiences are not just similar by coincidence, but instead point to something universal, something that lies beneath the surface of every human life. Milarepa's conscious journey through the bardos and today's reports of near-death experiences, or NDEs, seem to echo one another in striking ways. Both describe leaving the body, traveling toward light, and encountering moments that reshape one's understanding of existence. The parallels are hard to ignore, but the differences between them, shaped by time, culture, and approach, only make the comparison more intriguing. Milarepa's accounts of the bardos start with an intentional act, stepping into the intermediate stages of existence to explore consciousness as it separates from the physical body. His descriptions of the dissolution of the earth, water, fire, air, and space elements reflect a profound awareness of inner transformation during death. Modern NDEs, though typically involuntary and less structured than Milarepa's practices, often describe the same sense of separation. Many people report floating, looking down at their physical form from above, and experiencing their mind as entirely separate from their body. While Milarepa consciously guided this process, today's NDEs seem to unveil the same possibility, that awareness may transcend the physical, challenging our ingrained notion that consciousness is limited to the brain. Encounters with light are another unmissable connection between these accounts. In Milarepa's journey through the bardos, he entered the bardo of Dharmata, described as a state of clear luminosity. He perceived this bright light as reality in its purest form, beyond all distortions. In modern NDEs, the experience of light often emerges in a tunnel, pulling the person toward a radiant, overwhelming brightness that many describe as being filled with love or understanding. Andy Petro's recollection included a feeling of being enveloped by light that communicated directly with him, offering not just warmth but deep clarity and humor, qualities also attributed to the light in Milarepa's experience. In both cases, the light plays a central role, not only as a visual presence, but as a symbol of peace and a gateway to unfiltered reality. Even the concept of reviewing one's life finds surprising alignment across these two narratives. During Milarepa's conscious journey, he observed visions in the bardo of becoming, where karmic impulses revealed potential rebirths and outcomes. These visions were deeply personal, tied to his actions and choices, and illuminated the consequences of his life. Modern NDEs report something remarkably similar: panoramic life reviews, where individuals re-experience significant events, not just from their own perspective, but through the emotions of others they impacted. Andy Petro's sphere of interconnected moments, where he not only saw but felt the full weight of his actions, mirrors Milarepa's encounters in the bardos. Both suggest that the moments of transition between life and death are intimately tied to reflection, understanding, and for some, transformation. However, one significant difference emerges when examining the cultural framing of these experiences. For Milarepa, the bardos formed part of a larger spiritual framework. Tibetan Buddhism offers a detailed system for understanding these states, emphasizing practice, preparation, and mastery over consciousness. His journey through the bardos was deliberate, shaped by teachings passed down through generations of practitioners who regarded these states as an opportunity for enlightenment. Modern NDEs, on the other hand, often occur spontaneously and without preparation. They're described by people from all walks of life: atheists, devout believers, or those who never considered their spirituality before the moment of crisis. And yet, despite these differences in context, the core elements remain eerily similar. This universality raises an intriguing question. Could these experiences reflect something inherent to human consciousness, transcending our cultural and temporal differences? Here's where things get even more fascinating. Ancient spiritual traditions like Tibetan Buddhism may have developed techniques to explore the very same states of consciousness that modern science is only beginning to investigate. Milarepa's practice of Bardo Yoga, for example, involved precise methods to navigate death's intermediate stages with full awareness. He treated the process of dying as a skill to be learned, a chance for liberation and profound discovery. Today, neuroscientists studying near-death experiences might not use the same terminology, but their exploration of consciousness at the edge of death suggests a similar curiosity. Milarepa's techniques could almost be seen as an early roadmap for what now plays out in cardiac arrest studies or research into DMT and neural activity at the brink of death. The convergence of Milarepa's wisdom and contemporary science doesn't just challenge how we think about life and death, it pushes the boundaries of what we even consider life to mean. If consciousness can exist, even briefly, beyond the physical, as these accounts suggest, then perhaps death isn't the end, but simply a transition. And if ancient traditions once had ways of intentionally accessing these states, might there be lessons waiting for modern science to rediscover? Even if their interpretations differ, whether through Milarepa's lens of enlightenment or science's focus on neural activity, the implication is the same. There's more to existence than meets the eye. What stands out most about these parallels is their universality. Both the ancient and the modern accounts describe a process that is deeply human, yet profoundly beyond human understanding. Milarepa's journey, though framed through a spiritual tradition, shares core elements with the spontaneous and diverse NDEs of today. Perhaps these similarities tell us something about consciousness itself, that it transcends culture, belief, and even time. The question remains, though, if both ancient and modern experiences seem to point to the same truths, what does this mean for our understanding of consciousness? Could the tools of Tibetan Buddhism and the findings of neuroscience work together to reveal a more complete picture of what happens when we face the mystery of death? Ancient wisdom and modern science seem to converge on a profound realization. Consciousness may extend beyond the physical boundaries of life. Milarepa's journey through the bardos mirrors the shared human elements reported in near-death experiences, out-of-body awareness, encounters with light, and deep reflection. These parallels challenge the way we think about death and suggest a universal mystery at the heart of existence. What does this mean for us? The answers might lie in exploring both spiritual practices and scientific discoveries, bridging the gap between the two. If the end reveals so much, perhaps the question isn't about death, but about life itself. Bow.